I could talk about what books and what movies to watch or read that will help with A-level history and English literature. So I do know in the courses, obviously your school could pick all different types. Like history, there's usually like 4 options, and for English I think there's 4 options too, and there's obviously different novels. So that English literature last year I didn't find as many books. I have more books for this year, and history I think I've always found great books for history. So last year I did Germany, I did the Nazi coming to power, and then I also did the USSR, and like for basically from Lenin to Gorbachev. And then for this year for English, what I've done so far, I've done The Handmaid's Tale and then Frankenstein, like comparison, and I've done Unseen Poetry. Unseen Poetry is kind of hard to find anything for that. And then I started for romantic poetry, but romantic poetry does tie into Frankenstein. It's obviously the same time period, so I could definitely help you for that. And then for history this year, I'm doing the American Revolution and the Cold War. I thought, let's get started. I thought I'm going to talk about history first because I have a lot more for that, and then I'll go into English literature. It's called The Coming of the Third Reich. So this is very niche. Obviously this is very much about Germany. This is not at all. This is very much just not retelling in a story-like way at all. It's kind of like obviously very factual. To be honest, I didn't finish reading all of this, but it is quite interesting. Like, I do love the books that have all, and it's actually got things that actually happen. These are great books, but I think if you're trying to make this fun and you're trying to make this enjoyable, sometimes this isn't great. But this book, this author, he has 3, this is a trilogy, it's not like a storybook, but there's all different parts, all different types. This is the book that I will recommend to anyone that takes history. Now this time period too, it doesn't matter what you're taking. So you could be studying World War II, which we know, Germany, Russia, France, the US. So it doesn't matter what country you're studying, this is still great. So this is set in France, but it's particularly about how the Nazis invaded, and it obviously is a very feminist novel. But this is what I love about Kristin Hannah. She has so many, I've got so many of her books that I'm going to recommend. They are great. The way she writes, and I love romance. Like if I had to read a novel for the rest of my life and I could only pick one genre, I would pick romance. She ties in romance too, so it's not boring, but I love the way she talks. It's set in World War II, but it's also great if you're studying the Cold War like I am. So you don't really need to know about World War II, but you do need to know about what happened, what occurred, just like kind of a brief thing so you can understand then how it got to the Cold War, because obviously the big 3 also played a part in that. Again, with Kristin Hannah, so this is the Vietnam War. This is all about the Vietnam War. I'm reading this currently, studying the Cold War. I don't think for my syllabus I do not need to talk about the Vietnam War, but it's good to have an understanding not only of obviously what was happening, because obviously President Kennedy, I will be learning about him, but also just understanding what it was like at that time period. Because I think when writing history essays, you need to understand what actually happened. Like obviously you have to be very factual, you have to analyze it. You don't want to just script it. It's not a storytelling. The whole point of a history essay is not just to recount what happened, but actually to obviously analyze it and answer the question. But understanding what it was like, how much death, what was happening, obviously, and this is talking about how America didn't tell anyone what was actually going on in Vietnam. It's really interesting, and obviously that is kind of what the Cold War was about. Countries weren't telling people, and that's kind of how it all happened from the atomic bomb. When Truman didn't tell Stalin that it was going on, it created this level of imbalance and this conflict against trust. No one trusted anyone. The Winter Garden, this is set Cold War, very much very dependent on the USSR, Russia. So last year I did study Russia. I studied all the 4 dictators, but this is great because it's got starts from the 1940s and then comes up to the modern day. Like I'm saying, it's great to actually understand what it would be like to live under the regime, especially of Stalin, like food shortages, like fierce censorship. This I would recommend for the Cold War, or if you're studying Russia, you kind of just understand Stalin and how he kind of ran the regime, because I think you can obviously learn about all these policies, but it's also kind of like, okay, what did it actually feel like in life under authoritarian rule? Okay, now I have these other 2 of Kristin Hannah. I haven't read either of them. I am reading The Great Alone next. This is like 1970, like this is post-Vietnam War. The Four Winds, this would be great for someone if you're studying the US. It talks about like the Great Depression, living through that. I'm not doing the Great Depression. Yes, I will be reading it because it's kind of like what happened before we got to the Cold War. It's before World War II. So if you also are studying World War II, it'd be great to kind of just read it because again, you're getting in the mindset of what it felt like. The way Kristin Hannah writes is so you are encapsulated into this book. Like, I started reading it 2 days ago. I'm more than halfway through. Like, it keeps me up at night when I want to read it, because I've tried to read other books because I want the knowledge, but it just, a massive thing for me is I cannot read something, and if I read something and it's not interesting to me, it doesn't come into my brain. Like, yes, I read it, but I could not tell you what happened. This, I could already tell you. I could already tell you what's happened. The Four Winds, definitely Great Depression. This is US centered, still American centered, obviously post Vietnam War. Great for people studying the Vietnam War. I'm pretty sure I was actually looking. Option D, if I'm correct, explores more of the war in Asia, so obviously this would be great. I wish I was doing that, but I'm not. It definitely talks a lot about segregation, what happened in World War I, because obviously at this point in time, the 1900s, the early 1900s, there still weren't laws in place for different race people. So I think this is really, it is really sad, and also has romance in it, so I think that's why I liked it a lot. Also great for English literature, which I'm coming into now, so it kind of leads into it, but it's like this Greek god presence in it, and I think it's really interesting because you kind of, it shows you this different level of character development and kind of like narrative structure. So I feel like now, since I've been doing English literature for 2 years, and this year I think with Frankenstein and The Handmaid's Tale, I really need to look at the structure. Okay, now before I go into English literature books, I'm going to talk about history movies that you should watch. I have a whole list on my phone that I'm going to read out to you. So there's The Patriot. This is if you're doing obviously American Revolution or any US history. I know you might not need to watch it if you're studying World War II, for example, but I think kind of understanding these repeated conflicts that happen in America, and from the Civil War especially, you see their economy boomed, and that is why also when you look at the Vietnam War, why Kennedy was shot, why they wanted to prolong the war, because it made their economy boom. And there's so much, this is a lot in the American Revolution. There's the 12 Years a Slave, so this is obviously talking about what it was like being a slave. There's also lots of literature, so much on slavery. Obviously the whole point of the Civil War, it could be argued either states' right or slavery. I do believe it was slavery, because later the emancipation, everything, but it's great to kind of just see how they were treated, because I feel like you read so much, and don't get me wrong, how I've been taught it by my lovely history teacher, she's really explained it to me really well, but I think also kind of just watching is great. Now there's also just a Lincoln movie, it's just called Lincoln. What I found quite disappointing in this though was it only focused from 1864 and then 1865 when the Civil War stopped. I wish it kind of spoke about soon in April in 1861, as soon as the Civil War started, because I would have been more interested in kind of finding all that out. But I have tried to find documentaries. I haven't found a great one yet for the Civil War. Some are quite boring, just in the sense that it's so much focused on the battles, and yes, you do need to know the battles, but not so much this year. I don't like, yes, your battles would use to kind of evaluate and kind of use in your analysis, but you don't solely ever just talk about a battle from what I've seen. Then there's a movie called 1776, so this is a lot about the Declaration of Independence, again, so American, and then The Birth of a Nation, American again. Now for the Cold War, James Bond. So James Bond obviously came from the Cold War. Is it going to tell you that much about it? No, but is it really interesting to kind of see? From Russia with Love, this is great because it's a woman, she's in Russia, and like you hear about all the different terms. This is why I also think is great, because even though yes they are movies, they've got all the terminology that you will be using in your essays. With the Nightingale, they had all different German language that you can use to kind of just build on and show your knowledge. Again, The Living Daylight was also very much Cold War. So those two I would definitely recommend, just kind of getting an idea of what it was like living during the Cold War, and also all of the paranoia that was around. They were filmed during the Cold War. It's also kind of what came out of World War II. So again, if you're doing, from what I've seen, the other option, there was like the Hot War in Asia and also mid-Cold War. So these are still great. There's a movie called The Death of Stalin, so much on Russia. If you're doing Russia, I think there's so many different topics. If you're doing Russia or Cold War, so many things can intertwine for this one. The Man from U.N.C.L.E., such a good movie. I actually watched it when I wasn't studying the Cold War. I watched this maybe like a year ago, but it's great because obviously all of these spy movies are inspired by the Cold War. Another movie called Atomic Blondie, I started watching it. It's really good. It's a girl who works at MI6 and then she's transferred to Berlin before the collapse of the wall. So you get an understanding for that. None of these movies are going to teach every single bit in your syllabus, but they might elevate and kind of help you understand it. For The Handmaid's Tale, another one by her, she has also The Testaments, which is about kind of like the aunts and everything. I have not read that, but I've heard it's very good. Or Alias Grace. So I haven't finished this, but I've started reading it, and the most important thing, and kind of also why my teacher did recommend it's the unreliable narrator. Grace Marks is the most unreliable narrator there is out there. And there's also a Netflix series. I have watched it. I kind of wish I read the book first, but at least I know what happens. So this is also on Netflix. If you don't want to read it, it's also a TV show. Unreliable feel, you don't really know if she's telling the truth. You hear kind of like what she's thinking in her mind, like it's spoken, but obviously not out loud. It's kind of spoken over the audio when she's doing stuff. I think that's why this is such a good book, because again, The Handmaid's Tale and Frankenstein are both unreliable narrators. Now, this is very much for Frankenstein and the romantic poetry. So this talks about Mary Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. It is the best book I've ever read that's an autobiography but twisted into a story. Charlotte Gordon is a great writer. I definitely want to read more of her books. It goes back and forth, so it's literally like a ping pong, and it's literally like, that's what my teacher tells me when I'm doing the comparison. Ping pong, you've got to keep comparing. But it talks about like how she grew up, blah 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 blah. And it's so interesting because he can make all these parallels. For example, in this, so when the creature sees the de Lacys and he finds those 3 books, one of them is called The Sorrows of Young Werther, and it's basically about this man who, there's unrequited love between him and this woman that he really loves. She's engaged to another man, and in this I found out, and I thought this was really interesting because this is context. Not only can you obviously analyze why the book says intertextuality, because it's actually another book written by someone else, but Godwin, so Mary's father, read it the night before she was conceived, so obviously it holds significance and importance for her. So no, because I know there's definitely an argument that can be made why she kind of put all of these books in there, like Cornelius Agrippa. Yes, it can be argued that she was an 18-year-old, she was trying to show off maybe her knowledge, because a woman at that time, you're kind of confined to reading all these romantic novels or like these domesticated novels. Very big, yes. I did try and read 1 to 2 chapters a day. I can't exactly remember how quickly I went through it, but it's really interesting. I also just love hearing about, well, it's obviously late 1700s to 1800s, but also how women were then. I don't know, I always say I wish I kind of lived back then. I love the fashion, and I love how there was no technology. This is also great for history because in it kind of talks about John Adams and his wife came and saw Mary Wollstonecraft before she had Mary. They're about Thomas Paine. If you are studying the American Revolution like me, this is also another great one. Probably just the start of it. You may as well read all of it, but I feel like you kind of need to understand what's happening, why all these people are so significant and how she met them, because she was in this massive group of people that all had these radical and revolutionary ideas. Last book is The Five. So I personally don't like reading horror stories. I don't think I would be able to sleep. I feel like watching a horror movie compared to actually reading one, it's completely different. When I was recommended this by my teacher, I was really worried, but the only a bit gross at the start, kind of just like understanding it, but it's obviously about Jack the Ripper, so I was very worried about it. It's not at all. It focuses more on the women. It doesn't talk about how they were killed. It literally stops when they were dead. Like it kind of goes in this transition, so like the last they usually heard of the women, and then how their funeral or what people had to come and say about her, stuff like that. it's basically an autobiography on all the different women. And not only has this writer kind of brought the women back to life, it's great because you find there talks about all these education acts. Like in here, for example, this is kind of, it relates to Frankenstein in the sense that the Education Act was only passed in 1870. When Victor Frankenstein went to school, went to Ingolstadt, there was no law saying that he had to go to school. You can also draw on John Locke and Rousseau's ideas there too. But also it talks about the poor, which is not really spoken about in Frankenstein or The Handmaid's Tale. Obviously, because this was before The Handmaid's Tale was written, you can also talk about anything in here, but not like the Poor Act doesn't align as much with either of these novels. But I think the prejudices, like the aesthetic moralism, is definitely in it. How women appeared and kind of the marginalization of women in society, and how there was no laws supporting women. If society was corrupt in the sense of how they viewed other people, and the hierarchy, which I think is very prevalent in both novels. This idea of the hierarchy, it's come from the 1700s, it's come all the way from then, and here too there's hierarchy. Okay, now for English movies, I have so many. I've watched so many that I could already recommend. Obviously there's The Handmaid's Tale, there's the actual TV show. Frankenstein has just came out. I don't love it. I actually didn't finish watching it just because it's so different to the story. I did not want to actually watch it. Yes, the filming and the atmosphere, that was great. So then there's also just a movie called Mary Shelley. Some of the context in it is not accurate, so definitely do take it with a grain of salt, but I think it's great for kind of understanding what that time period was like. There's the She Said movie, so this is definitely around more The Handmaid's Tale. It's the third wave feminism, but The Handmaid's Tale does follow. It was published during the second wave feminism, but it's great to kind of understand. It's also, I think it's just a great movie. Then we've got Wuthering Heights. I'm pretty sure there's so many adaptations of this. There's actually the book to read by Emily Bronte, but it talks about women of the time. It doesn't necessarily apply to Frankenstein because Bronte wrote after Shelley, but it's still the time period and it's still how women grew up. And again, because it is speculative fiction, Atwood could have drawn from anything and everything. Then there's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is in 1994, which is definitely better in the sense it's more accurate to Frankenstein. The Crucible, which I think is definitely so important. The Salem Witch Trial. Atwood has just come out with a podcast with Dua Lipa, and she talks about how her great grandmother or auntie was actually hung, but she didn't die. And she did so much research, and since she went to Harvard are in Salem, which is in a part of Boston, and if I'm correct, I'm pretty sure Harvard is in Boston. The wall, for example, the hanging, that comes from there. All of these kind of, the Puritanism, the women, the theocracy, it all comes from there. Women talking. I watched this. It took me by surprise. I was a bit confused because they are kind of like Puritan women, but it is set in the time period now. It's essentially women who have been exploited by men, and the whole scene, the whole entire movie is essentially them all sitting and talking about what they should do. They've taught essentially like what we see in these novels, the 1700s, 1800s. Women are domesticated, women are meant to be in the household, and that's essentially what they have been too. It was quite an interesting movie. I don't know if I would have watched it unless I was actually studying English literature. This is definitely one of my favorite TV shows I've watched so far. Under the Banner of Heaven, and it's got, I've forgotten her name, but they're great actors. She's an Irish actor and the other guy's an English actor. Thomas Garfield, is that his name? Yeah, that's him. And then, I don't know, she's from Normal People. It's based on a real story. It's basically the Utah versus Laverty case, and why you can bring this in is, first of all, so I love it. It's kind of like I love explaining this. So the Mormon beliefs, that's what it's kind of set around. Mormon's belief came up during the 1800s, more 1830s, kind of when it was more predominant and where polygamy came from. But that's essentially in Frankenstein, these really fixed principles. Frankenstein isn't a very religious novel, but obviously at that time period there was fixed beliefs in the church. They kind of came first, if that makes sense. And then the Utah versus Laverty case, so that case came out in 1984, a year before The Handmaid's Tale was published, and that is why you can bring it in as contextual information. I'm not going to get into too much details because it is quite graphic, but it's basically about how these men had these revelations that they claimed, and that is why they committed murder, or what they did. Essentially, they let their religion rule what they chose, and essentially that is what happens in Gilead. So I hope that was helpful. I know I kind of definitely did base it around my subjects. I did try to be more broad for the history books and the English books, but yeah, let me know if you have any others. Obviously I know people learn all different topics, but I hope they did help. You can definitely also type up on ChatGPT if I didn't cover your topic. I have other books on the way too, but I might have to do another one about that. But yeah, I hope that was helpful.